In part 9 of our Dei Consentis series, we'll be covering the Roman god of fire and the forge, Vulcan. A child of Jupiter and Juno, Vulcan was the Roman god of the forge and metalworking, as well as having elements of being the deity in charge of fire. If any of the gods needed something made, especially something made through blacksmithing, such as weapons or armor, the gods would turn to Vulcan. Some of his most famous creations were Jupiter's lightning bolts, as well as Mercury's helmet with wings, which we'll talk about in a later video. Just like most of the rest of the Big 12, Vulcan's mythology came from the Greeks. According to the Greeks, his name was Hephaestus. Like in Greek mythology, the Romans also believed that Vulcan had been injured as a child, and therefore only had one good leg. This was very unusual for a god, as I'm sure you can imagine, so the other gods looked down on Vulcan. This led to a very lonely life. He was so lonely, in fact, that one myth tells of how he used his skill in crafting metal things to create a chair which would trap his mother Juno in it. He didn't like her very much, and he didn't let her out until she promised that he could marry Venus, who, as we know, was the most beautiful of goddesses. Even though the two were married, they never really loved each other, and never even had any kids together. Despite being undoubtedly strong from his work at the forge, you have to be strong to swing a hammer all day after all, Vulcan preferred to use his brain when solving problems. Romans saw much of themselves in Vulcan. They viewed their strong armies as a necessity to maintain peace, but they felt that the real strength of their republic and empire was in the genius of their engineers, generals, politicians, and artists. As we can deduce from his name, Vulcan lived inside a volcano, Mount Etna. Our English word volcano comes from his name. Using the fire and heat of the volcano, Vulcan was able to forge some of the most marvelous weapons, tools, and devices the gods had ever seen. When he became angry, the mighty blows he dealt with his hammer to the forge would fly off into the sky, causing eruptions. Vulcan's symbol was the tool he used to forge all of these things, the hammer. The Latin word for hammer is malleus, sort of like the word mallet in English. One thing to help visualize is that the hammer the Romans were thinking of didn't look like our hammer today. This hammer is the very basic type, more of a stick with a large flat weight attached to the end. Using this hammer, he would beat heated metal against the anvil to form it into the shape he wanted. Another symbol of Vulcan is fire. Now this one isn't so much a physical symbol or item as it is an idea. Fire, historically speaking, is a very powerful, even terrifying thing. When a wildfire started back then, there was nothing except the mercy of a god that could put it out. Because of this, Vulcan was simultaneously feared and respected. The same fire that can destroy is also used to build. The Latin word for fire is ignis. Speaking of the good and bad effects of fire, the Romans had a festival for Vulcan in late August called Vulcanalia. During this festival, people began their work by the light of a candle to highlight a beneficial use of fire. Later, bonfires were lit around the cities in honor of the god, and Romans would throw things into the fires to appease the god and make sure that there were no wildfires that year. Shortly after the Great Fire of Rome in 64 AD, a man who would later become emperor, Domitian, established a new altar to Vulcan in Rome. This makes a lot of sense, since the Romans would build altars and temples to the gods during and after natural disasters. The Vulcanalia festival was held in August, after the traditional date of grain harvests, in order to ensure that Vulcan did not allow a fire to consume the food that they had just raised for themselves. Although he was nowhere near the most famous nor worshipped god, the Romans in their daily lives did have a need for the worship of Vulcan. Since fire is so useful and so dangerous, the Romans had to ensure they worshipped the god properly in order to avoid any mishaps or even disasters.